Today's date is July 29, 2017. Another lesson here dealing with the language of the scriptures. And I read here this verse that I've read before in another video from 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 26. Then said Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, and Shebna, and Joah unto Rabshakeh, Speak, I pray thee, to thy servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it. And talk not with us in the Jews' language in the ears of the people that are on the wall. So it's basically trying to let us know that he's saying, speak to us in the Aramaic, because we understand it. And don't talk to us in the, what we're thinking is Hebrew today. He says, don't talk to us in Hebrew in the ears of the people on the wall, because I guess he's like, this is a private matter. They don't need to hear it. Let's just discuss this together. So talk to us like this. Now, it's funny because if we're told that Aramaic was a lingua franca, then why wouldn't the people have knowledge of that? If the languages were not that different, why wouldn't the common people know enough to know the lingua franca that he's being asked to speak in? So how would that hide anything if he uses Aramaic? Because they would have known the Aramaic. But apparently the text is letting you know that the regular people on the wall, the Israelites, did not know it. Did not know Aramaic, the so-called language of their forefather Abraham. They didn't know it. And two, a language that had been used as a lingua franca to allow people to communicate almost anywhere they went, and certainly in biblical times, the Hebrews did not know it. And so you see what that does now? It bursts the bubble that we've been in when we open the Bible to say we know the scriptures and we know God and all that. Because it lets you know that even though these are Hebrews from Judah as well, that they weren't all necessarily that skilled in all this kind of knowledge, right? And we just think as you look at a Hebrew in the Bible that they're all that. Obviously, he's saying this basic lingua franca, this basic Aramaic, the rest of the Hebrews don't know it. So talk to us in that. But we are somehow just thinking that everybody knew this stuff, but apparently not. But Rabshakeh wanted to continue to speak like that in the so-called Hebrew language so that all the men on the wall, or the people of Judah, all of them will hear what he's saying as he speaks for his king, the king of Assyria, because he wanted them to hear just what the message is, as opposed to having a private conversation in Aramaic. He wanted them all to hear so that they would be afraid and hear what would happen to them and so on, so that they would more kind of pressure the king now, Hezekiah, to give in, right? So that they would all be spared from the attack of the Assyrians. Now look at this when you deal with the Proto-Canaanite language. The Phoenician alphabet, called by convention the Proto-Canaanite alphabet, for inscriptions older than 1050 BC, is the oldest verified alphabet. So they're letting you know that the Proto-Canaanite is what's used as a convention because it is the oldest verified alphabet. This does not say it is the oldest. It just says the oldest verified. It's not saying as well it is an alphabet for the original tongue. It is just the oldest one that they have found, that they have verified, and that they can speak authoritatively on in terms of scholarly findings and studies. So it's just what they have verified. That does not prove that this Proto-Canaanite, which we call Paleo-Hebrew, is the original language. It's not saying that. It just says that's what they've been able to verify. And it has 22 letters. Now, if it has 22 letters, now Here, from this other website, lists.ibiblio.org, and this guy made some posts and saying if anybody has any information on this. Then this other guy is trying to speak on it, trying to correct him and help him out with it and so on. A part of it here, now he's saying, in point 3 on this page, he's saying, you're assuming that the more letters a Semitic language has, the older it is. This is simply not true. The number of individual signs an alphabet has reflects in part the number of sounds that were pronounced when that alphabet was originally adopted by that particular alphabet. Hebrew actually had more than 22 phonemes, which is dealing with the way you pronounce the sounds. And when you look at words, you might make different sounds in order to pronounce one word. And you might even make more than one sound to pronounce a single letter. So he's saying the number of individual signs an alphabet has reflects in part the number of sounds that were produced when that alphabet was originally adopted by that particular alphabet. Hebrew actually had more than 22 phonemes, but since it adopted a Canaanite alphabet, it was forced to combine such phonemes as ayin, gayin, and sin, shin into single letters. It adopted the Hebrew, they're saying, adopted a Canaanite alphabet and was forced to squish itself into 22 letters. So it squished the phonemes, or the way you pronounce the combination of sounds, into being represented by a lesser amount of alphabets. So if it had more than 20 new phonemes, then that's kind of sounding like if you're going to write letters to more... Oh, okay, you see now what's coming to me now, because, I've been wondering if there were more than 22 letters to the alphabet to represent the original alphabet of the original Hebrew. And here now, this person's kind of hinting, or at least my mind would go there, that more than 22 letters would have been used to represent, or more than 22 characters would have been used to represent the original Hebrew, or the original language, if it was not called Hebrew. Because they're saying that it was squished into 22 letters when it adopted a Canaanite alphabet. That means before it adopted a Canaanite alphabet, as I've been telling you before, that it's common knowledge that Hebrew is a Canaanite dialect, that it could have been represented by more than 22 characters. So then, you see what I'm trying to get at here? That somehow some kind of change happened when it adopted this Canaanite alphabet. Keep in mind as well that if Abraham was speaking Aramaic, then he was speaking lingua franca, and then he would have known more languages, because different languages were used as lingua franca at different times. Like Aramaic was used as a lingua franca, and you get to find out that Assyrian was used as lingua franca as well. So it seems to me as well that based on where Abraham lived, then he would have known Assyrian, spoken Assyrian, Aramaic, which you'd call Syrian, and also spoken Akkadian. For this talk here, I'm kind of thinking that he spoke Akkadian. Now you're going to hear me say different things at different times because I'm searching. I've got novice level of knowledge in this, so I'm working my way through it. And the more I learn, the different thoughts come to me. But he could have used Akkadian possibly as his main tongue. It's possible. But look now, Aramaic is said to normally be thought of and spoken of as being a single language, but it was really a combination of different languages. So then Aramaic was just different languages. So hear this now. I'm going to read this verse for you. Hold on. So now in Deuteronomy 26:5 it says, "And thou shalt speak and say before the Most High thy power, a Syrian ready to perish was my father. And he went down into Egypt and sojourned there with a few and became there a nation mighty and great and populous." They're using this now to tell us that Abraham was a Syrian, so he was from Syria, or he spoke Aramaean or Aramaic. But if he spoke Aramaic, it could just mean that he spoke a lingua franca but had his own other language as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Aramaic was his main tongue. Now, back to when Rab Shaka was speaking now and trying to speak in the Hebrew, and they said to him, speak in the Syrian or in the Aramaic. He is delivering a message for his king of Assyria. They say Sargon II. Now, when I searched on what language they spoke, because this would have been about 705 BC, they said, and it seems to me that they were speaking Akkadian. And again, I'm telling you, Abraham would have spoken Akkadian as well. Right? Abraham would have spoken Akkadian. Now look at what the Assyrians would have been speaking. Because when you're dealing with Assyria, you're dealing with, Assyria, Babylon. And I'm learning now that a lot of these places were run by the Semites or the Shemites. And so you're dealing with the lineage of the people from the Most High, although some of them went astray. Because remember, Abraham was actually living in a place, in a land, where these different kingdoms were. And they were Shemites or Semites, and they had gone astray. Even his own father, Terah, had gone astray. And the Most High just basically moved him out of the area and said, I'm going to do something with you, right? And fulfill my plan through you. And took him out of Ur of the Chaldees, out of that Mesopotamian area, and took him into the land of Canaan. And when he got there, then he would have kind of merged his language with, or started using a Canaanite language called Hebrew. Today we know as Hebrew, which, as I read to you before, they said the alphabet was condensed down into 22 characters. Now, this king, Sargon II, is from Assyria, and they're coming up against Hezekiah. The languages that they spoke there would have been Akkadian, Sumerian, Aramaic. Hear that? Akkadian, Sumerian, Aramaic. And since Aramaic was linked to Abraham, then it seems he was speaking that as lingua franca to communicate with different people. But Akkadian then seems to me to be a language that Abraham would have been making more use of locally when he didn't need to do business with foreigners. Because that foreigner type of language that he would use, the lingua franca, would have more been Aramaic. But privately, he would have then been using Akkadian. So that's what I'm thinking about right now. Abraham would have been speaking Akkadian. Now you got the Sumerian as well too. Alright, I'm going to deal with that some other time. But right now I just want to give some consideration to the Akkadian. Because somehow it seems a little bit strange, this Hebrew. Now, as I mentioned before in the earlier videos on this topic, that I was told that the Hebrew is the Aramaic and the Aramaic is the Hebrew. But if that is the case, then why is the Hebrew a lingua franca if it is one with the Aramaic? Because the Aramaic is considered a language that was used as a lingua franca. But a lingua franca is actually a mix of different languages. So then, would the original tongue be a mix-up of different languages so people can understand? It would just be its own pure language. But a lingua franca would have been made up of different languages, including the original language, if that was Hebrew or not, whatever it was. The lingua franca would have been a mix of the real original Hebrew plus other languages around, such as the Sumerian, the Akkadian, and other languages. That would have made up a lingua franca and might have then been called Aramaic, because Aramaic was just a mix of it's a combination of different languages. Now, from this website, telegraph.co.uk, Assyrian language, what is it? Assyrian is a dialect of Akkadian. So then, if it's a dialect of Akkadian, that's like saying Hebrew is a dialect of Canaanite language. So then, when Abraham left Ur and went among the Canaanites, he basically went into an area where there are different kinds of languages under the heading of Canaanite language or Canaanite tongue. That Canaanite tongue, we just loosely think of it as being a language, but it was really Canaanite was really a group of languages. And the Hebrew that we link with Abraham was just one of the dialects of the Canaanite languages that Abraham found when he got there. And so it's the same that with the Assyrian language, it's telling you that Assyrian is a dialect of Akkadian. So Akkadian would be like the head language, like Canaanite would be the head language, but Hebrew and other languages would be dialects under that heading of Canaanite. Well, then Akkadian that I'm saying here Abraham would have known and spoken as his more normal, regular language, using the Aramaic just occasionally for business, or maybe often for business and dealing with foreigners and traveling and so on. But Akkadian would be like the master language that Abraham would have known. And so then if that is the head language, Akkadian, then Assyrian would be a dialect of that Akkadian language. And you see that? And so when you deal with the Assyrian and the Babylonians, they would have been speaking some type of Assyrian, because there are different kinds of Assyrian, so that's for another lesson. But there are different kinds of Assyrian. But then they would just be a dialect of Akkadian, a master language, might I say, which Abraham would have known. So if Akkadian was not the original tongue, then at least at this point it is a master language or a head language that Abraham would have still known, and Assyrian would have just been one of the dialects of that. So Abraham would have still been using a master language, Akkadian, and would have also known sub-languages of it or dialects of it. One would have been Assyrian. You see what I'm saying? So Assyrian now, listen to this. Assyrian is a dialect of Akkadian, an extinct Semitic language that was spoken in ancient Mesopotamia. And Abraham came out of Mesopotamia from Ur of the Chaldees. But notice that they're saying it is extinct. And of course, Akkadian extinct. Now, are they telling you that the real language of the Shemites became extinct and that the real Hebrew became extinct? Well, if this is saying as well that the Akkadian became extinct, it is possible, I'm only saying possible here, it is possible that there is, a link right there, that the real Hebrew is extinct and the Akkadian master tongue that Abraham would have spoken is extinct. So then, is there a link between these two extinct languages? Akkadian and Hebrew. Is the Akkadian the real Hebrew? Because both of those, the real Hebrew and the Akkadian that Abraham knew, became extinct. And they became extinct having been used in an era where Abraham was. He was in Mesopotamia. But notice that the Assyrian continued to be used, like even the Aramaic continued to be used, right? A dialect of Akkadian, the Assyrian, a dialect of Akkadian, continued to be. So a dialect of it. But the master tongue in its purer form, the Akkadian, became extinct. And here if you go to this website, like, you know, sometimes doing all these extra pictures to show you just takes up so much extra time. But if you go to the website, telegraph.co.uk, and run a search with that for Assyrian language, what is it? Because it's got a long string for the website, then you should come upon this article. And they show us the index card with the research that they're doing, but it's not even clear to see it anyway. Now, this Assyrian, they're wondering, what is it? It was in use for 2,500 years, but has not been spoken for more than 2,000 years. That's funny, because when you add up that 2.5 to 2,000, you deal with 4,500 years. So that really then goes back to even the Garden of Eden time, Sumer, Eden time, and so on, right? So you're dealing with a more ancient language. So no matter where you go, you're still finding somebody telling you that which was at the start has become extinct. But look now, extinct might more simply mean hidden or covered up. The more I read and listen to other people, is also the more I start to think that the people who are calling themselves Arabs today and dealing with this Arabic language have their hand in some of the cover-up of the real language. That's the sense I'm getting more and more. Now, I heard a video recently, I don't remember what it's called, but it's from, what's the brother's name again? Judah Netzar, brother from, what's the group? Torah Nights. And he did a video one time called, let me see if I can find it now. I downloaded it. I'm not sure if I'll find it now, but let me look quickly. But he did a video where he said that these modern Jews, the Israelis, learned Hebrew from these Arabs, these modern Arabs. Okay, no, I don't think I'm going to find that right now. But basically, he's saying they learned the pronunciations and so on for the Hebrew from them. Now, why are they teaching these modern Israelis who took on our identity if they didn't have knowledge of it? And why would they go to them to learn it? Obviously, they would have known how to pronounce that more ancient Hebrew, or what was close to the ancient Hebrew, but whatever Hebrew was back then, that's in use in the Bible today, these Arabs are teaching them to know it. So they're not speaking the Hebrew, the Arabs, they're speaking their own Arabic, but yet they're sitting on the knowledge of how to pronounce the Hebrew that nobody else apparently in the world seemed to know how to pronounce this Hebrew in the Bible today, but they knew it and were sitting on it. So, and these Jews today, Israelis, and these Masoretes, these Jewish people, knew all along, it seemed, that these Arabs knew how to pronounce the Hebrew and went directed to them when they went to take on the Hebrew to learn it from them. So people know the language. People know it. Because if they know this Hebrew, who's to say that they don't know the language before that? Who's to say? And every time you run deep searches on this, it keeps coming up with this Arabic, that there's a link there. They know it. They know it. And through all kinds of conquests and so on, they've taken over a lot of the different places from the Israelites and have renamed them with their Arabic names through times of conquest. So they would have had a very, very ultra-rich history of the language and lifestyle and the customs of the people of Israel from way back then. And they're still living over that side of the world now. You see that? So wouldn't they be a part of the whole cover-up? You can't tell me there are many books and websites dealing with this stuff, and nobody seems to be able to crack it and just figure out for sure what the real language of Abraham was or Adam was and so on. But when the Israelis get ready to go into the land of Israel or become Israelis and learn the language, they go to them. So you go to a people who are not Israel to teach you to speak the language of Israel. Does that make any sense? If you are Israel, shouldn't the language be restored from the Most High to you directly? So they're all in cover-up stuff. This is all a big trick. Because all these websites and books that have been written, and nobody can crack the language clearly yet, so that you can just read one page and just say, bam, this is the language. You have to go through all kinds of whatever and go 20 years in university trying to learn this stuff to be able to figure out this, that, and the other. And when you come out, the next scholar still argues with you. It's clearly a bag of confusion. So this Assyrian, which is a dialect of Akkadian, so it's letting you know it's close to Akkadian, was in use for 2,500 years, but has not been spoken for more than 2,000 years. The Assyrian dialect of Akkadian was spoken in the northern areas of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. The Babylonian dialect was spoken in central and southern Mesopotamia, Mareotic in the central Euphrates, and Tel Bedar in northern Syria. So now when you're dealing with Assyria in the northern areas of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, you're dealing now with Abraham. So you're not far from Abraham. No matter what you do, you're not far from Abraham and dealing with this Assyrian, which was a dialect of Akkadian. So Abraham would have definitely been all up in the Akkadian and its sub-languages as well. He would have known of that, right? And yeah. So there have been different phases in Assyrian's development. Old Assyrian was spoken between 1950 to 1530 BC, Middle Assyrian between 1530 to 1000 BC, Neo-Assyrian between the years 1000 to 600 BC. Okay, so look now. They're going on here to say so the Old Assyrian was spoken between 1950 to 1530 BC. So I'm going with the older of the dates that they've given here, right? So between 1950 to 1530 BC, you've got the Old Assyrian, which would have been still of the Akkadian. So it was a part of the Akkadian. Akkadian is like the head language, because the Assyrian would be a dialect of Akkadian, spoken in parts of Mesopotamia where Abraham was. Now, 1950 to 1530 BC, when did Abraham live? Abraham lived, they're saying here, he lived in the city of Ur in Babylonia, because when you're dealing with Assyria, Babylonia, or Babylon, you're dealing with where Abraham was, and a lot of Shemites were in these areas, right? In the year 1948, they're saying from this Jewish Virtual Library.org, from creation, 1948 from creation. So they're saying circa 1800 BC. So that means that if it's circa 1800 BC and they say Abraham, okay, so you're dealing with Abraham living within the time frame of 1950 to 1530 BC, when the Old Assyrian was spoken, or when this Akkadian dialect was spoken. So Abraham would have then been speaking Akkadian. But you see, the thing is, why I get so upset at this stuff is because they're on this trip of Hebrew, and telling at the same time that the real Hebrew went extinct, but then Akkadian went extinct, and Abraham was speaking that, and nobody wants to mention that. I'm not saying it couldn't be Hebrew, whatever that means. But at some point, how come is it that most of the people who write the books on the earth, and they're doing all this ancient Hebrew research, I'm talking the big scholars now, not just the little ones of us, most of the big people, the big researchers, how come a lot of times they don't mention much about Akkadian? As if we'll just mention it in passing, and we just kind of silently gloss over it, so that we still mention the word Hebrew in your ears, so you will continue to think and believe Hebrew. Why don't you mention Akkadian some more? You have to get people digging into it to start talking some more about Akkadian. When Abraham would have been speaking this Akkadian and Assyrian in the time when it was spoken, where he lived. Come on. So now look, Assyrian served as the lingua franca during much of the Old and Middle times and was extremely popular. So this Assyrian that was a part of the Akkadian language or a dialect of it was itself a lingua franca. So far we have two lingua francas that would have been associated with Abraham. This Assyrian and also Aramaic. You see that? But a lot of times we just hear Aramaic and Hebrew with Abraham, Aramaic and Hebrew, but mostly Hebrew. That's what we hear. But now we find that Assyrian is linked to him and Akkadian is linked to him heavily, because it's saying that this lingua franca Assyrian was extremely popular in the old times when Abraham lived. So Abraham, if it was extremely popular, Abraham would have definitely been speaking Assyrian, people. He would have been speaking Assyrian. And the children of Shem and the people of the Most High would have known it as well. Remember, even Jonah, although that's different time, could just go and speak to Nineveh, the king of Nineveh, because it was used as a lingua franca. So the Akkadian itself died out, but the Assyrian dialect, it was still being used. So, but the master language, that the master language Akkadian, it died, but apparently dialects still survived. Now they go on to say, during the first millennium BC, Akkadian progressively lost its status. See that? Akkadian lost its status. So it was dying out now, it was going away. And if we say that the real language of the Hebrews died out, then here is a language that died out as well, Akkadian, that we know Abraham was speaking. So there could possibly be some very, very, very strong link right there. Because we know Abraham knew and spoke Akkadian. Abraham spoke different languages. But Akkadian at this time seemed to have been a master language where he was at. And they were just dialects of it. Like I mentioned to you before, you had Canaanite, but then you got sub-languages under that. So now they're pointing out, I guess, due to the Persian conquest of the area in the Mesopotamian kingdoms, Akkadian disappeared as a popular language. The latest identified Akkadian text comes from the 1st century AD. So now we deal with the Assyrian Empire in 2500 BC to 605 BC, which was still going on when this king sent Rabshakeh to speak, Sargon II. This Assyrian Empire was still going on, still up and running, and they were speaking, they would have known Akkadian as well as the Aramaic. So then if the Aramaic, if the Assyrian is only a dial, is used as a lingua franca, and the Aramaic is used as a lingua franca for people who didn't understand the top level language, Akkadian, then basically when they're saying to Rabshakeh, speak to us in Aramaic, they're saying speak to us in the lingua franca. We understand that. Speak to us like that and don't use our language. But they call it the Jews' language, saying don't speak to us in the Jews' language. So, but they don't want to tell you what the Jews' language was. So since the Aramaic is a lingua franca and the Assyrian is a lingua franca, both of which Abraham would have known and the Hebrews would have known, but they're spelling out the lingua franca Aramaic, and we know they can't hide the Assyrian as well, because this is Assyria that's sending Rabshakeh to speak. Then the only language right there in 2 Kings 18 verse 26 that's not being identified by a specific name is the Akkadian. That's how I see it, because the Aramaic and the Assyrian is clearly what would come to mind, because this is the Assyrian Empire, so Rabshakeh would have known the Assyrian, and they're telling him speak in the Syrian or Aramaic, so that's clear. So why would they then try to hide the Jews' language by just calling it Jews' language? Why not let that be known as well? Why? Is it because you don't want to tell us that it is Akkadian? You're telling us that it died out, yet maybe the people are still speaking the Akkadian? I don't know. Supposition. But it really gives food for thought though, right? helps you search out some more stuff. But it seems to me that the Hebrews at some point in the children of Shem, at least in the time of Abraham, was speaking Akkadian. So why is it that Hebrew, just because Abraham went across the Euphrates and the Canaanites called him Hebrew, because he supposedly crossed over, then you want to believe he spoke Hebrew. But when you see in history that he spoke Akkadian and Neo-Akkadian, you don't want to call him Abraham the Akkadian.